Imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing the internet is gone. Not weak, not slow, gone. Your phone still turns on. Your laptop still works. The lights are on, but nothing connects. No messages, no banking app, no maps, no news, no payments, no search, no social media, no way to instantly know what is happening. At first, it feels like a glitch. Then the card machine fails. The ATM line grows. Airports slow down. Hospitals switch to emergency procedures. Stores put handwritten signs on their doors. Governments return to radio and television. Rumors move faster than facts. And millions of people ask the same question: how much of the modern world still works when the internet disappears? This is not a story about losing entertainment for a week. It is about losing coordination. Banks need the internet to verify money. Hospitals need data to move fast. Supermarkets need logistics to keep shelves full. Governments need communication to keep people calm. Families need connection to know who is safe. For the first few hours, people would refresh their screens, waiting for life to come back. By the second day, cash would matter again. By the third, supply chains would begin to strain. By the fourth, fear and rumors would shape behavior. By the end of the week, the world might still be standing, but it would no longer feel as stable as before. Because the scariest part is not that civilization would instantly collapse. It probably would not. The scariest part is what the blackout would reveal: that the internet is no longer just a tool. It is money, memory, work, communication, logistics, security, and trust. And if it vanished for 7 days, the real question would not be whether we could survive without it. The real question would be how much of modern life would be exposed while trying. The first major shock would come from money, not because money would disappear, but because the systems that prove, move, and authorize money would suddenly become unreliable. In the modern world, most money is not something people hold in their hands. It is a number inside a banking system, a credit limit approved by a network, a salary processed through payroll software, a card transaction waiting for authorization, or a digital wallet that depends on connection. When the internet disappears, your balance may still exist, but the world may no longer be able to confirm it quickly enough for you to use it. At first, the problem would look ordinary. A card machine fails at a supermarket. A banking app does not open. A transfer stays pending. A digital wallet cannot complete a payment. A small business cannot confirm whether yesterday's sales were settled. A customer at a fuel station hears the phrase that suddenly becomes terrifying: "Sorry, the system is down." During a normal outage, people get annoyed and wait. During a global outage, they change behavior. Stores would begin choosing between bad options. Some would accept only cash. Some would write down card details and hope to process payments later. Some would limit purchases. Some would close until they understand the risk. Every business would be asking the same question: should we trust a payment we cannot verify? Cash would instantly regain power. People who rarely carry banknotes would rush to ATMs, and the lines would grow quickly. But ATMs are not unlimited machines. They need network access, security systems, bank authorization, maintenance, and physical cash replenishment. Some would stop working. Some would run out of money. Some banks might restrict withdrawals to prevent confusion, fraud, or panic. This is where confidence begins to crack. A person may have savings, a salary, investments, and credit, but if they cannot access any of it, they feel poor in the moment. A business may have customers, but if payments cannot be confirmed, it cannot safely operate. A company may owe salaries, but if payroll systems are disrupted, workers may not receive money on time. The economy does not freeze because wealth disappears. It freezes because trust stops moving. Financial markets would face immediate pressure as well. Stock exchanges, currency markets, payment networks, clearing systems, and investment platforms depend on fast data and reliable communication. If the outage is truly global, some markets could suspend trading or move into emergency procedures. The problem would not only be fear of losses, it would be the inability to know prices, confirm transactions, manage risk, and understand what is happening across the world. Small businesses would suffer first. Large banks and corporations may have backup procedures, emergency contacts, private systems, and crisis teams. But a small shop, restaurant, freelancer, delivery worker, or local supplier may depend almost entirely on online orders, digital payments, cloud accounting, banking apps, and messaging platforms. For them, 1 week offline would not be a pause. It could be a serious financial wound. As hours become days, the economy would become more local, more manual, and more suspicious. People would prefer cash. Businesses would trust known customers more than strangers. Some communities might revive informal credit. Take it now, pay me when the system comes back. But in large cities where most transactions are anonymous, trust would be harder. A supermarket cashier cannot personally know every customer. A pharmacy cannot release expensive medicine on a promise. A fuel station cannot fill every tank without payment certainty. By the end of the first day, the lesson would be clear. Digital money is efficient because the system constantly confirms it. Without that confirmation, even a full bank account can feel locked behind a door. And once money slows down, the pressure moves to places where delay is far more dangerous. Hospitals, pharmacies, ambulances, and emergency rooms, where missing information can cost more than money. Hospitals would not collapse the moment the internet disappeared. Doctors would still be doctors. Nurses would still care for patients. Ambulances would still move. Emergency rooms would still open. But the system around them would become slower, more fragmented, and more vulnerable to mistakes. Modern healthcare depends on speed and information. Patient histories, allergies, medication lists, lab results, imaging files, prescriptions, insurance records, hospital transfers, ambulance dispatch, and supply requests often move through digital systems. If those systems become unavailable or only partially accessible, medicine does not stop, but every decision becomes harder. Imagine an unconscious patient arriving at an emergency room. In normal conditions, staff may quickly access digital records, previous diagnoses, prescriptions, and allergies. During a global internet blackout, that information may not be available. Doctors would have to rely on family members, paper documents, pill bottles, local files, or their best clinical judgment. That can work, but it takes time. And in emergencies, time is not a small detail. Pharmacies would face similar pressure. Many people depend on daily medication, insulin, heart medication, blood pressure pills, asthma inhalers, antibiotics, anti-seizure drugs, and other essential treatments. Pharmacies might still have medicine on the shelves, but verifying prescriptions, checking refills, confirming insurance, contacting doctors, and ordering replacements could become much harder. Some pharmacies would dispense limited emergency quantities. Others would require paper prescriptions. Controlled medications could become especially difficult to access without verification. Laboratories and diagnostic services would also slow down. Some tests could still be performed locally, but sending results, updating records, sharing scans with specialists, and coordinating treatment across facilities would become more complicated. A lab result that normally appears in minutes or hours might need to be printed, carried, called in, or manually entered later. One delay may be manageable. Thousands of delays across a health system create risk. Emergency services would not be immune. Police, fire departments, ambulance networks, and civil defense agencies usually have backup communication methods, including radio systems. But many modern dispatch operations also depend on mapping tools, digital records, hospital availability updates, caller location data, traffic information, and interagency platforms. Without full connectivity, response would become more manual and less precise. The public would make the pressure worse without meaning to. People unable to find reliable information might call emergency numbers to ask whether hospitals are open, whether pharmacies are working, whether schools are closed, or whether the blackout is local. Those calls would compete with real emergencies. Fear consumes human bandwidth, and emergency operators would become part of the front line. Hospitals could also turn into information centers. People might arrive not only because they are sick, but because they need help, medication, confirmation, or reassurance. Emergency rooms would have to separate true medical emergencies from confusion-driven visits. Security may become more visible. Non-urgent procedures could be postponed. Staff would spend more time explaining, documenting, and coordinating manually. The most realistic danger is not that every hospital suddenly fails. The danger is friction. Missing records, slower prescriptions, delayed lab results, crowded waiting rooms, harder transfers, uncertain supplies, and exhausted staff. Healthcare would keep working, but with less speed and less visibility. And after a few days, hospitals would face a deeper problem. They do not operate alone. They need medicine, fuel, food, sterile supplies, replacement parts, laundry, waste removal, blood deliveries, staff transportation, and payment systems. In other words, healthcare depends on logistics, and logistics is where the blackout would move from emergency rooms into supermarkets, warehouses, ports, trucks, fuel stations, and kitchen tables around the world. Food would not disappear from supermarkets on the first day. Trucks would not suddenly vanish from highways. Ships would still be at sea. Warehouses would still be full of products. Farms would still have crops. Factories would still have machines. The physical economy would still exist, but the invisible system that helps coordinate it would be badly damaged. Modern commerce depends on information moving before products move. A supermarket needs to know what was sold, what is still in stock, what must be reordered, which warehouse has it, which truck will deliver it, when it will arrive, and whether the payment and documentation are confirmed. A factory needs to know which parts are available, which suppliers are delayed, which orders should be prioritized, and where finished goods should go. Logistics is not just movement. It is timing, verification, and coordination. During a global internet blackout, stores would first face the behavior of frightened customers. People would not wait calmly for official explanations. They would buy what feels essential: food, water, medicine, batteries, baby formula, pet food, hygiene products, and fuel. Some would call it caution, not panic. But when thousands of cautious people act at the same time, shelves begin to change very quickly. That is how shortages can appear before supply is truly gone. One empty shelf creates a rumor. One long line makes the next customer buy more than planned. One closed store becomes evidence that something worse is happening. Fear increases demand. Demand empties shelves, and empty shelves confirm the fear. The internet outage would not need to destroy the food supply to create a food crisis. It only needs to make people uncertain. Store managers would be forced to improvise. Some would accept only cash. Some would limit essential items per customer. Some would shorten opening hours. Some would keep handwritten sales records. Some would ask employees to control lines at the entrance. Some would close temporarily because they cannot verify payments, update inventory, or confirm deliveries. Every decision would be defensive because every store would be trying to avoid being emptied faster than it can restock. Behind the stores, warehouses would struggle with scale. A large distribution center may contain thousands of products and supply dozens or hundreds of locations. Normally, software helps decide which items move first, which trucks go where, which stores are critical, and which orders are delayed. Without reliable connectivity, workers could still move goods, but they would rely more on printed lists, phone calls, radios, manual counts, local records, and memory. That works for a small operation. It becomes much harder when an entire region is under pressure. The same problem would hit trucking. Drivers can still drive, roads still exist, and engines still run. But trucking depends on dispatch systems, GPS routes, fuel payments, warehouse appointments, delivery confirmations, electronic documents, and communication with clients. A truck full of food could be physically close to a city and still be delayed because nobody can confirm where it should unload, whether the receiving warehouse is ready, or which delivery has priority. Ports and airports would face similar bottlenecks. Containers, cargo, workers, cranes, and runways would still exist, but customs forms, cargo manifests, tracking systems, scheduling platforms, payment confirmations, and international coordination could slow dramatically. Perishable goods may become harder to prioritize. Factories waiting for imported parts may not know when shipments will arrive. A delay at one port can become a delay in a factory, then a delay in a store, then an empty space on a shelf. Fuel would become one of the most sensitive points. Fuel keeps trucks, ambulances, generators, farms, and emergency vehicles moving. If payment systems fail and delivery coordination slows, fuel stations may switch to cash only, limit purchases, or run out temporarily. Long lines would create tension, and rumors of shortage could create the very shortage people feared. By the middle of the week, governments might need to prioritize essential deliveries: medicine, fuel, food, hospital supplies, and emergency equipment. That would help, but it would also show the public that the blackout had moved beyond inconvenience. When authorities begin deciding which goods move first, the crisis has entered the real economy. The deeper lesson is simple. The internet does not carry food to your table, but it helps decide what moves, when it moves, where it goes, who pays, and what happens when something goes wrong. Without that coordination, abundance can start to look like scarcity very quickly. And once shelves, fuel stations, and deliveries become uncertain, governments face their next challenge: keeping the public calm while the system itself becomes harder to control. When the internet disappears, governments face two crises at the same time. The first is operational. Public services slow down, agencies lose part of their coordination, and critical infrastructure needs protection. The second is psychological. People become afraid because they do not know what is happening, how long it will last, or who they should trust. The first priority would be communication. Governments would need to return to older channels: television, radio, landlines, emergency broadcasts, printed notices, press conferences, police announcements, local officials, and public information points. The goal would not be to provide perfect information. It would be to give people enough certainty to prevent fear from becoming disorder. The message would need to be simple and repeated often. Which services are still working? Which emergency numbers should be used? How hospitals are operating? How banking access will be handled? How food and fuel distribution will be prioritized? And what behaviors people should avoid. Do not overload emergency lines. Do not rush to hospitals unless it is necessary. Do not hoard fuel. Do not spread rumors. Do not assume banks have failed. Do not assume food is gone. But telling people not to panic is much easier than making them believe it. In a connected world, people are used to checking official sources instantly. Without the internet, they would believe what they can see around them. If the government says supply chains are stable, but a local supermarket has empty shelves, people believe the shelf. If officials say fuel is being managed, but the station has a long line, people believe the line. If banks say deposits are safe, but the ATM has no cash, people believe the machine. This gap between official reassurance and visible reality would be extremely dangerous. Rumors would spread through older routes, conversations in lines, radio callers, neighbors, taxi drivers, shop workers, printed notes, and family phone calls. Someone would say it was a cyber attack. Someone else would say borders are closing. Another person would claim banks will not reopen. Without easy verification, a rumor only needs to sound possible to influence behavior. Security forces would become more visible. Police, civil defense, military units, and local authorities might be deployed around hospitals, banks, fuel depots, food warehouses, ports, airports, power infrastructure, water systems, and broadcast stations. The goal would not be to create fear, but to protect the places society needs most while coordination is weaker. Governments would also need to make priority decisions that many people would not like. Fuel may go first to ambulances, hospitals, police, delivery trucks, and generators. Medical supplies may move before ordinary commercial cargo. Some public services may be reduced. Schools may close temporarily or operate with local instructions. Airports and borders may slow down. Certain businesses may be asked to limit operations while essential systems stabilize. Every priority creates tension. Why did one neighborhood receive supplies first? Why is one fuel station open and another closed? Why are police guarding warehouses instead of residential streets? Why can some businesses operate while others cannot? In a crisis, allocation decisions become emotional because people experience them personally. The strength of each society would depend heavily on trust. Countries and cities with tested emergency plans, strong local leadership, reliable broadcasting, clear chains of command, and public confidence would adapt better. Places with weak institutions, political division, low trust, or poor emergency planning would struggle more. The blackout would not only test technology, it would test whether people believe their institutions are competent and honest. Local leadership would become especially important. A national statement may be useful, but a mayor on local radio, a hospital director giving practical guidance, a police chief explaining fuel rules, or a school principal telling parents what to do may matter more. In a week without internet, trust becomes local because information becomes local. The state would not disappear during a global blackout, but it would become more exposed. People would suddenly see how much modern government depends on digital coordination, and governments would see how quickly uncertainty can become a public order problem. The real challenge would be to keep society organized long enough for the connection to return. And while banks, hospitals, logistics, and governments struggle to adapt, the final shock would happen inside ordinary people themselves. A week without internet would not only disrupt systems, it would disrupt routines, habits, relationships, attention, work, loneliness, and the way people experience time. That is where the crisis becomes deeply human. After the first technical shocks, the blackout would become personal. It would no longer be only about banks, hospitals, stores, fuel, or governments. It would enter homes, routines, relationships, emotions, and habits. People would begin to realize that the internet is not just something they use. It is something that quietly shapes how they live. The first reaction would be almost automatic. People would keep reaching for their phones even after knowing nothing works. They would unlock the screen, open an app, refresh, wait, close it, and try again minutes later. This habit would reveal how deeply the internet has entered ordinary life. Boredom, worry, curiosity, loneliness, and uncertainty are usually answered with a screen. During the blackout, those answers would not come. Time would start to feel different. For some, it might feel slower and calmer. For others, it would feel heavy and uncomfortable. Without messages, feeds, videos, searches, notifications, online meetings, streaming, and constant updates, many people would suddenly face long stretches of silence. But silence is not always peace. For people who depend on the internet for work, income, support, education, medical information, or family contact, silence can feel like danger. Families would experience the blackout in very different ways. In some homes, people would talk more, eat together, play games, organize supplies, and rediscover simple routines. Parents might realize how often screens filled quiet moments. Children might ask questions that cannot be answered instantly. Couples and relatives might reconnect. But in other homes, the lack of distraction could expose tension, anxiety, boredom, financial stress, or conflict that was usually hidden behind screens. Distance would also become real again. A loved one nearby could be visited. A loved one in another city or country could become difficult to reach. People would rediscover the value of written phone numbers, physical addresses, local contacts, meeting points, radios, printed documents, and neighbors who actually know each other. The blackout would show that digital connection can make distance feel smaller, but it does not erase distance. Communities would become more important. In strong neighborhoods, people might check on elderly residents, share information, help families without cash, organize rides, lend radios or batteries, and create handwritten notice boards. Local stores, churches, schools, clinics, and public squares could become information points. In weaker communities, fear would spread faster than trust. People might isolate themselves, hoard supplies, believe rumors, or see strangers as threats. The emotional impact would not be equal. Some people might describe the week as a forced digital detox, a break from noise, comparison, outrage, and endless distraction. Others would experience it as isolation or financial risk. A remote worker may lose income. A delivery driver may lose access to the platform that gives them jobs. A student may miss classes and deadlines. A migrant may be unable to call family abroad. A person who lives alone may realize that most of their daily human contact came through a screen. Young people would face a specific kind of shock. For many, the internet is not a separate tool, but part of their social environment. Friendships, humor, music, identity, dating, school, and status often move through digital spaces. Some would adapt quickly, but others might feel cut off from the world that gives them belonging. Older adults might have more experience with offline routines, but many could still depend on digital banking, telehealth, appointments, medication systems, or remote family contact. By the middle of the week, a new form of literacy would appear. Offline literacy. The ability to navigate without live maps, pay without apps, remember information without search engines, plan without instant messages, and solve problems through local relationships would suddenly matter. People who seemed perfectly capable in a connected world might feel lost in a manual one. Others, often those with older habits or stronger local networks, might become surprisingly useful. This would be one of the deepest lessons of the blackout. Being connected is not the same as being close. A person can have thousands of contacts and still not know the neighbor next door. A family can exchange messages every day and still have no emergency plan. A city can generate millions of online interactions and still struggle to organize help on one street. By the end of the week, many people would be desperate for the internet to return, not only for comfort, but to make the world understandable again. They would want messages, bank balances, news, work updates, maps, confirmations, and proof that life can resume. But when the connection finally returns, it would not erase the memory of the silence. It would reveal how dependent modern behavior has become on instant access, and how fragile people can feel when that access disappears. When the internet finally returns, the first sign would be small. A message appears, then another, then dozens. Phones begin vibrating again. Emails flood inboxes. Banking apps reopen. News websites update. Social media comes back to life. Across homes, offices, hospitals, airports, banks, stores, schools, police stations, and government buildings, screens begin to reconnect to the world. At first, the dominant feeling would be relief. Families would contact loved ones. Workers would receive instructions. Companies would check accounts. Hospitals would update systems. Governments would release explanations. Newsrooms would rush to reconstruct the week. People would search for answers, causes, damage reports, official statements, and proof that the crisis is truly over. But the return of the internet would not immediately return the world to normal. A week offline leaves a backlog. Payments need confirmation. Failed transactions need review. Duplicate charges need correction. Payroll delays need resolution. Medical records need updating. Lab results need reconciliation. Prescriptions written manually need to enter systems. Deliveries need rescheduling. Airlines need to reorganize passengers. Ports need to clear cargo delays. Stores need to restock. Factories need to restart production plans. The internet may come back quickly, but trust would return slowly. A person looking at their bank balance may wonder if it is accurate. A business owner may wonder which payments truly cleared. A hospital may wonder whether any patient information was missed. A logistics manager may see tracking data again, but still need to confirm where trucks, containers, and supplies really are. The question would no longer be only, is the internet back? The deeper question would be, what happened while we could not see? Governments would face public pressure immediately. People would demand to know what caused the blackout, who was responsible, why some systems failed, why some regions received better information than others, and whether it could happen again. If the cause was a cyber attack, the event would become a national security issue. If it was a technical failure, it would become a debate about infrastructure resilience. If it involved sabotage, the protection of critical systems would become urgent. If the cause remained unclear, uncertainty would continue even after reconnection. Companies and institutions would also face difficult questions. Why did so many services depend on constant connectivity? Why were offline alternatives so weak? Why did some hospitals, banks, stores, schools, and agencies adapt better than others? Why were emergency communication plans not clearer? Why did ordinary people have so little guidance for a world without instant access? This would change the public conversation. Before the blackout, topics like redundancy, backup systems, emergency broadcasting, offline records, cache access, supply chain resilience, and critical infrastructure may have sounded technical or boring. After 7 days offline, they would feel personal. Everyone would remember the moment a card failed, a pharmacy could not verify a prescription, a relative could not be reached, a shelf looked empty, or a rumor could not be checked. People would not abandon the internet. It is too useful, too powerful, and too deeply woven into daily life. But many would see it differently. Some would keep more cash. Some would print important documents. Some would write down emergency contacts. Some would buy radios, save offline maps, create family meeting points, or ask employers and schools about backup plans. The goal would not be to reject technology, but to stop treating access as guaranteed. The deepest lesson would be that progress is not simply making everything digital. Real progress is making digital systems resilient enough to fail safely. A society that depends on the internet for money, medicine, food, work, communication, logistics, and public order cannot afford to treat it like entertainment infrastructure. It must treat it like electricity, water, roads, and emergency services, something essential, fragile, and worth protecting. By the end, the world would still be standing. The shelves would refill, payments would clear, hospitals would update records, governments would publish reports, markets would reopen, messages would arrive, life would move again. But the illusion would be broken. The internet would no longer feel like background noise. It would feel like what it truly is, one of the invisible systems holding modern civilization together. And if it ever went silent for a full week, the most frightening discovery would not be that humanity cannot survive without it. The frightening discovery would be how much of modern life becomes slower, weaker, more anxious, and more exposed while trying.